I bought this Subaru pressure washer, ea190v, which is a 3100 psi, 2.4 gallons per minute. It's a Power Stroke pressure washer. It's very similar to like the Home Light and some of the Ryobi pressure washers out there. It's not like a true Subaru. I think they just slapped the name Subaru on top of it. I bought it from Costco about 7 years ago. I loved it. It has a power starter with a battery that you charge. Runs great. Cleans the driveway very nicely. Great for car wash. All around pressure washer for the house. I started to have issues with it after it sat around for about 3 years. And when I tried to start it again 3 years later, it wasn't working properly. It would only run with the choke on. And once you turn the choke off, it would just stall and die. So I figured that it needs some maintenance. It has a little over 20 hours of fuse on it, so it's fairly new, as you could tell. And I changed the oil, changed the battery, changed the spark plug, and that did nothing. So I started doing some research online, and I saw that a lot of people are talking about the carburetor. That once it's these things sit around for a while, you get fuel sediments that will sit in the carburetor, and those can plug up the jets of the carburetor. So took it apart, followed some videos on YouTube, saw how they did it, cleaned out all the little parts for the carburetor. I did not use carburetor cleaner. I just used like alcohol and vinegar, and I thought that would fix it. It did, and I also used the pin to clean out all the little tiny holes on the jets. I put it back together, put it back on the pressure washer, started it, ran great with the choke on, took the choke off, ran great, very smoothly, no issues. But as soon as I connected the pressure washer to the water hose and turned on the water, after the pump got primed, it started to bog down, and it sounded like the engine was just about to stall. Whenever and that would happen when I pulled the trigger on the water gun. I barely had any water coming out. It wasn't building up any pressure, and it would just bog down, and eventually it would stall out. So I figured that the carburetor was fine because I just cleaned it. I did some research online. People were talking about the unloader valve and the pump, and I was like, well, maybe it's that. So I started to take the pump into pieces, and here's what we find. Pump, which runs about $90. Also found out that I can return the whole thing back to Costco, but I said, let me at least try to fix it first before I do that. So then I took it apart, and this is what I found so far. So this pretty much, the way this works is you have these three pistons, and when the pump spins, it pushes those pistons in and out. And when it pushes those pistons in and out, as the water comes in through the inlet and goes into here, it gets pushed out of these three outlets here into these outlets, which will push the water out down this way and into the outlet to your pressure hose. There is one release valve, so when you take your hand off of the trigger of the pressure gun, it's supposed to relieve the pressure, and that pressure is supposed to come out of this opening and back into here and circulate back into the pump. And look what I found. This hole is completely clogged up with little tiny rocks, dirt, and so on and so forth. So that needs to be cleaned out. So here's a look at this again. So this is the valve that allows for back pressure to get released, and there's a little ball inside here with this and the spring at the tip of this valve, and there's no way this thing is gonna run. This thing is like rock hard. You'd think that it's part of it, but no, it's not. This is just dirt that has calcified over time. So I'm gonna try to soak this in some vinegar and see if that helps, and this as well. And if it doesn't work, I'm gonna try to see if I can just purchase this particular part, because the rest of the pump looks just fine and there's no need for me to pay 90 bucks for the whole thing. Okay, so that was a really bad idea. It did nothing. And I don't even know if it damages any of the parts inside. I bought this part online, and this is it. This is the old one. I already installed the new one. The part comes with its new clean O-rings, and it also comes with a bypass valve. The reason I decided to do that is because I was unable to take this valve out. I tried all my best to remove it, but I couldn't. I ended up bending it, and I even tried holding it with a clamp and banging this down, trying to get this out. As you can tell, like, I literally did a number on it and it would not come out. There's a clip right here that goes in there, and I took that out and still wouldn't come out. So I was like, screw it, decided to buy a new one. I think it was like around 30 bucks on Amazon, and I installed it. Now, after I installed it, the pressure washer did get better, but it's not functioning normally. So pretty much, if you use one of the nozzles that are small to get a lot of pressure out of it, it starts to stall. But if you're using the wide angle nozzle, it runs fine. It's just when it gets into that, when it needs that high pressure, it starts to stall. It doesn't actually stall, it's about to stall. So I'm not exactly sure if I need to adjust the bypass valve on it, or I need to reclean the carburetor or get a new carburetor. So I'm gonna start off by getting a new carburetor, simply because it's better. And try that out, see if it's good there, and if it's not, I'm gonna try the pressure valve. I saw someone online who adjusted this bypass valve, and they said that it worked. And I already cleaned out the carburetor. I don't entirely think that it's the carburetor, but I think it's also worth just changing it and getting a new one. So I purchased a replacement carburetor, which we have right here. Brand new one. It was actually very cheap. It was $13. It's very similar to the carburetor that I took off from my power washer in terms of the fact that it does fit, and most of the components are the same, except that Subaru makes two different types of pressure. One of them has a switch up top where the choke is, and the other one doesn't. For the life of me, I could not find one that looks exactly like this online. It's pretty much how it's supposed to look, like that. I could not find one that has this extension for the switch that's up top. Most of them look like this, where you have a little piece of metal that hooks up onto here, and the choke is pretty much from the side, like right over here. So my only option is to see if I can remove this choke and replace it with this one right here. So we're going to remove these and see if we can remove this assembly and install it onto this one. Let's go ahead and try that. So to remove this assembly from the new carburetor, try to pass a screwdriver right in between the plastic piece and the metal, squeeze it in between, and then you can grab this metal with pliers and pull it out. And then once the metal is out, it comes out. Okay, so we're done with this one. Now let's install this new one here. So the hook is gonna grab onto this metal piece right there, and you're gonna insert it in. Like that. And this is gonna go in like this. And so it should pretty much function like that. Oops, slipped up. I can make sure it's all the way in, make sure it's in that socket right there. And then now we're gonna put our plate back on. I saw a YouTube video about someone that was saying it's much easier to just get a brand new one instead of cleaning out the old one. And honestly, I completely agree. I cleaned out my old one. I didn't use carburetor cleaner. So I do suggest that if you want to try and clean your carburetor yourself, you at least use carburetor cleaner, because there's a lot of videos on YouTube where they used it and actually worked. So try that at least. All right, so now I'm gonna go install this. I did not take a video of what the actual problem was, but when you start the power washer, it runs fine. When you're not pulling the trigger, it's running fine. It sounds great. It's a continuous running engine, no problems. When you pull the trigger and the engine goes under load, what happens is there's this mechanism that's connected to this valve right here where it's facing the engine, and it controls this valve where it opens it full throttle like that, and then it adjusts it. So when the engine is not requiring any load, it's halfway open, kind of like this, where it's not using a lot of air and fuel. And when the engine goes under load and the engine is loaded, it pulls this full throttle to get the maximum amount of fuel and air. So I thought initially that valve wasn't pulling all the way, and I tested it. So when I loaded the motor and pulled the trigger, I noticed that it does pull the valve all the way. So that mechanism is working, but it's not throwing in enough fuel and air mixture for the engine to operate at maximum capacity. So I figured, you know what, I'm just gonna change the carburetor. I'm pretty positive that this problem should go away. And so now we are getting a continuous flow of water at a high pressure without the engine bogging down or stalling. So in conclusion, a few things I learned from this process. First of all, when you're done using your pressure washer, don't just turn it off and leave it. Before you shut it off, turn off the valve for the fuel, which is on the side, and allow the engine to use up all of the fuel that's sitting in the carburetor, and you can shut it off then once the engine starts to stall out. You know that all of the fuel inside the carburetor is running out. If you leave it without using all the fuel that is sitting in the carburetor, over time that fuel is going to dry out, and it's going to leave a lot of sediments inside the carburetor, and the next time you use it, the carburetor is just going to suck up all that debris in there, and you're just going to create that same problem that we were having here. The other thing is, do not run the pressure washer without having your water hose hooked up to the pump and with the water on. because the pump relies on the water that's circulating in it to keep it cool and to make it run smoothly without friction. So in conclusion, for this pressure washer, we had two issues. We had the carburetor, which was plugged up. We tried cleaning it. We should have used a carburetor cleaner. That could have helped, but it was much, much easier, and it makes more sense to just buy a brand new one and replace it, because it's only $13 for a new carburetor for this tank. The other problem was with the unloader valve. You get a lot of small pieces of rock and sediments and debris that will just sit in there and will make it malfunction. And the pump will not be able to circulate the water that is being pressurized. Once you have your pressure gun closed, you need the water to circulate inside the pump, and when you open up the pressure gun, you need it to build pressure and push it out. So when the unloader valve is not working properly, you're not going to get water coming out. The best way to know if your pump is working properly is to hook up the water to the pressure washer. Don't turn on the pressure washer, and open up the water gun. If you're getting water flowing through your water gun, obviously at low pressure, then you know your pump is working properly. If you get no water coming out, then there's a problem with the unloader valve. And that's pretty much everything that I can tell you about what I learned from fixing this. It's definitely doable. I feel like I can fix many of them now, because it's very straightforward. Don't throw your pressure washer away. It is definitely fixable. You don't always have to replace the entire pump assembly. Most of the time is just going to be the unloader valve and the carburetor. Those are the two biggest problems that occur with these things that make them malfunction.